Structural realism, Kenneth Waltz. Kenneth Waltz was an influential American political scientist and international relations scholar. He is best known for his work on the theory of international politics. Essentially, the foundational figure in neorealism, or structural realism, within the field of international relations. Waltz's most notable works include Man, the State and War 1959, and Theory of International Politics 1979. In Man, the State and War, Waltz explores the roots of warfare through the analysis of the levels of analysis, the individual, the state, and the international system. This framework helped to categorize different explanations for conflict and cooperation in international relations. Kenneth Waltz's Man, the State and War is a seminal text in the field of international relations that analyzes the causes of war through three images or levels of analysis: the individual, the state, and the international system. Each level provides a different perspective on why conflicts arise and how they might be resolved. 1. The first image, the individual here. Waltz examines the characteristics of human nature and individual leaders that might lead to conflict. Theories at this level often focus on psychological and moral aspects of human behavior, suggesting that wars occur because of aggressive tendencies, misperceptions, or poor decision-making by leaders. In Man, the State and War, Kenneth Waltz's first image, the individual examines how inherent traits and behaviors of leaders and human nature can lead to conflict. Theories at this level focus on the psychological and moral aspects of human behavior, suggesting that aggressive tendencies, misperceptions, and poor decision-making by leaders can drive nations into war. This perspective highlights the importance of individual actions and choices in the causation of international conflicts, suggesting that personal characteristics and the quality of leadership play critical roles in the emergence of warfare. By exploring these individual factors, Waltz underscores the complex interplay between human nature and international relations outcomes. 2. The second image, the state. This level considers the internal structure of states. Waltz discusses how the organization of a society and its political institutions drive states towards conflict. Different types of government economic systems, and social structures can influence how states behave in the international arena, potentially leading to aggressive policies or wars. Kenneth Waltz's second image in Man, the State, and War focuses on the internal structure of states, examining how the organization of societies and their political institutions can drive states towards conflict. Waltz argues that different types of governments, economic systems, and social structures can greatly influence state behavior in the international arena. For instance, authoritarian regimes might pursue aggressive foreign policies to divert attention from domestic issues, while democracies might be constrained by public opinion and legal checks. This level of analysis highlights how the internal characteristics of status such as political stability, economic performance, and social cohesion can lead to aggressive policies or wars. As states interact under the pressures and opportunities presented by the international system, Waltz's exploration of the state structure provides a crucial lens for understanding the varied motivations behind state actions and their impacts on global peace and conflict. 3. The third image, the international system. The most innovative aspect of Waltz's analysis. This level looks at the anarchic structure of the international system, where no central authority enforces rules or norms. This anarchy compels states to act out of a self-help instinct, often prioritizing survival and power, which can lead to conflicts. As states try to secure their position against potential threats. Kenneth Waltz's third image, the international system, is a cornerstone of his analysis. In Man, the State and War, this level addresses the anarchic nature of the international system, characterized by the absence of a central authority to enforce rules or norms. Within this anarchic structure, states operate under a self-help principle, primarily driven by concerns for survival and power. This dynamic compels states to prioritize their security and interests, often leading to conflicts as they seek to bolster their positions against potential threats. Waltz's insight into how the international system structure influences state behavior underscores the fundamental challenges of global politics, where the lack of overarching authority leads states to assume others might pose threats, thereby perpetuating a cycle of power competition and conflict. This innovative perspective highlights the structural forces at play in international relations, shaping our understanding of why conflicts emerge and persist in global affairs. Waltz argues that understanding these three images is crucial for comprehensively addressing the causes of war and developing strategies for peace. His framework has not only provided a robust analytical tool for scholars, but also influenced policymakers in thinking about how to structure international relations and prevent conflicts. This multilevel approach encourages a more nuanced view of international relations, moving beyond simplistic explanations and considering the complex interplay of factors that influence state behavior and the dynamics of the international system. II. Theory of international politics develops the idea that the international system structure, defined by the anarchic condition of no overarching authority above states, compels states to prioritize survival and power. Waltz's theory emphasizes that the structure of the international system influences the behavior of states, rather than the internal characteristics of individual states. Kenneth Waltz's theory of international politics advances the idea that the structure of the international system, defined by its anarchic nature without an overarching authority to govern, state actions fundamentally shapes how states behave. Waltz argues that this lack of a global sovereign forces states into a self-help condition where survival and power become their primary objectives. This structural approach is a departure from earlier theories that place more emphasis on the internal characteristics of states, such as type of government, economic conditions, and national culture. Waltz's structural realism, or neuralism, posits that it is not the internal makeup of states, whether they are democratic or authoritarian, rich or poor, but rather their position in the international system that most significantly influences their behavior. This theory suggests that all states, regardless of internal politics or culture, face the same anarchic international environment and thus respond in ways that ensure their survival and attempt to maintain or increase their power. By focusing on the international structure, Waltz's theory helps explain why states that seem different internally often behave similarly in foreign affairs. For instance, regardless of a state's political system, it will likely view military capability as essential to its security. Due to the potential threat posed by other states, this results in patterns of behavior, such as arms races and alliances, which are driven by the anarchic layout of the international system, rather than by specific national characteristics. Theory of international politics thus provides a framework for understanding international relations that emphasizes systemic forces over individual state attributes, offering a powerful explanation for recurrent patterns of international behavior, including conflict and cooperation among states. His work has had a profound impact on how international relations are studied and understood, shaping both academic debate and practical policy considerations. II. Offensive realism, developed primarily by John Mearsheimer. Offensive realism, developed primarily by John Mearsheimer, is a theory in international politics that is seen as an extension of structural realism or neorealism, building on the basic framework provided by Kenneth Waltz's structural realism or neorealism. Offensive realism asserts that the anarchic state of the international system compels nations to continuously pursue power to ensure their survival. According to this theory, all nations tend to expand their military and economic power to suppress potential rivals and maintain supreme status. This reflects a departure from merely seeking survival, as in Waltz's neorealism, suggesting that states strive to maximize their influence as much as possible. Offensive realism argues that the anarchic condition of the international system drives states into a relentless pursuit of power. Developed mainly by John Mearsheimer, this theory views states as continuously striving to expand their power to ensure their survival. The lack of centralized authority in the international system creates an environment where each state must secure its own security. In this environment, states choose strategies to expand their military and economic power, to respond to uncertainties and potential threats. Offensive realism posits that states aim not just to survive, but to achieve a dominant position, which distinguishes it from Kenneth Waltz's neorealism. While Waltz's neorealism focuses primarily on states securing their survival, offensive realism suggests that states also seek to maximize their influence, and through this, gain a competitive edge in the international system.
Basically, what I am is a structural realist. I'm a person who believes that it's the structure of the international system, it's the architecture of the international system that explains, in large part, how states behave. Another way to say that is I do not believe that domestic politics, I do not believe that the composition or the makeup of individual states matters for very much for how those states behave on a day-to-day basis in international politics. And to be a bit more specific about this, I believe the fact that states live in what we call an anarchic system. That's a system where there's no higher authority that those states can turn to if they get into trouble. That fact, coupled with the fact that states can never be certain that they won't end up living next door to a really powerful state that has malign intentions, all of that causes states to do everything they can to be as powerful as possible. And again, the reason that you want to be very powerful, that you want to pursue power, that you want to dominate your region of the world, is because in that situation, there is no other state that is capable of hurting you. If you're small and you're weak, in the international system, that means you're vulnerable. If you don't have a lot of power, what happens is that the big, the powerful states in a position where they can take advantage of you. And again, because the system is anarchic, because there's no higher authority that sits above states, there's nobody that you can turn to. There's no night watchman that you can call on the telephone to come and help you. So you're in a very vulnerable situation. And the way to avoid that is to be very powerful. And to give you a good example that really highlights this, think about the United States of America in the Western Hemisphere. The United States is by far the most powerful country in the Western Hemisphere. It has the Canadians on its northern border. It has the Mexicans on its southern border. It has fish on its eastern border and fish on its western border. No American ever goes to bed at night worrying about another country attacking it, right? And the reason is because the United States is so powerful. So the ideal situation for any state in the international system is to be as powerful as possible, because that's the best way to survive in a system where there's no higher authority, no night watchman, and where you can never be certain that you won't end up living next door to another country that has malign intentions and a lot of military power. In the world of realism, there are basically two sets of theories. There are what one might call the human nature realist theories and the structural realist theories. The human nature realists, and Hans Morgenthau, of course, would be the most prominent example of this school of thought, believe that human beings are hardwired with what Morgenthau called an animus dominandi. To put this in slightly different terms, Morgenthau was saying that all human beings are born with a type A personality. And when they get into power, what they want to do is pursue power as an end in itself. So in that story, it's human nature. It's the way human beings are born that causes all of this conflict in the international system. That's a very different way of thinking about the world than the structural realist argument. Structural realists like me and like Ken Waltz believe that it is the structure of the international system, it is the architecture of the system, not human nature, that causes states to behave aggressively. That's what causes states to engage in security competition. It's the fact that there's no higher authority above states and that states can never be certain that another state won't come after them militarily somewhere down the road that drives these states to engage in security competition. So although both realist schools of thought lead to the same form of behavior, which is a rather aggressive kind of competition, the root causes are different in the two stories. Again, on one side, you have the human nature realists who focus on the way human beings are hardwired. And on the other side, you have the structural realists who focus on the basic way that the system is organized. My view is that the most important questions in international politics are what a theory should be concerned with. And there are really only a few big questions out there that matter. And these questions largely involve war and peace. And I think one of the great advantages of realism is that it has a lot to say. Doesn't provide perfect answers, but it has a lot to say about the big questions in international politics. And one of the attractions of realism is that it is a parsimonious theory, which is a sophisticated way of saying it's a simple theory. Realism is easy to understand. A handful of factors are said to describe why the world, or to explain why the world works in particular ways, why you get these very important events like World War I and World War II. And I think that that's the most important thing that a theory can do, is to provide simple explanations for very important events. This is not to say that we shouldn't have theories that explain minor actions or minor considerations or peripheral situations in the international system. But the most important theories, by definition, are going to be those theories that deal with the big questions. And the theories that are going to matter the most, and I believe this is why structural realism matters so much, are those theories that are nice and simple, that are parsimonious. I believe that if China continues to rise economically, that it will translate that economic might into military might, and that it will try to dominate Asia the way the United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. I think that China, for good realist reasons, will try to become a hegemon in Asia, because I believe the Chinese understand now, and will certainly understand in the future, that the best way to survive in the international system is to be really powerful. The Chinese understand full well what happened to them between 1850 and 1950 when they were very weak. They understand what the European great powers, the United States and the Japanese, did to them. And they want to make sure in the future that they're going to be very powerful. So I think they'll try to dominate Asia. The United States, on the other hand, does not tolerate what we sometimes call peer competitors. The United States does not want China to dominate Asia. And the United States will go to enormous lengths to prevent China from dominating Asia. And of course, China's neighbors, this includes Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, India, and Russia, will not want China to dominate Asia. So they will join with the United States to try to contain China, much the way our European and Asian allies joined together with us during the Cold War to contain the Soviet Union. The same thing, I believe, will happen with China. So you will have this intense security competition between China, which is trying to dominate Asia, and the United States and China's neighbors, which are trying to prevent China from dominating Asia. So with regard to this question that lots of people are talking about today, can China rise peacefully? My answer is no. And my answer is based on my theory, because there's no way you can predict the future without a theory.
Get more from the Open University. Check out the links on screen now.
Let's start with the theory. As many of you know, I start
Liberalism is a theory of international politics that believes the fundamental
about the international system.
politics is
I'm a
globalization.
structural realist.
And globalization
I believe
is
that the
interdependence
structure of
between the interests
the system,
of groups in
the
different
way
societies.
the
Those
international
groups
system
then
is organized,
go to their governments
its architecture,
and ask them to regulate
determines, not
globalization
completely,
in different ways.
but in large
And those
part,
very
how
demands that
states
come
behave.
from groups in
Whether you're
different
Russian,
societies.
whether you're Chinese, whether you're American, you just have to do certain things because we all operate in the same system. So this system has 5 characteristics. And you take those 5 characteristics and you put them together and you get certain forms of behavior. That's my story. So let me lay out the 5 characteristics, or what I sometimes call the 5 assumptions. The first, which you all know about, is that the system is anarchic. Anarchic means there's no higher authority that sits above states. The opposite of anarchy is hierarchy. In English, anarchy sometimes means murder and mayhem, killing, wild and crazy, goings on. That's not what anarchy means here. Anarchy simply means that there's no higher authority in the system. In effect, the system is comprised of states that are like pool balls on a table. Some of those pool balls are bigger than the others, but nevertheless, they're all just pool balls with no higher authority. It's an anarchic system. The second assumption is that all states have some offensive military capability. This is not to say that all states have lots of offensive military capability, but the truth is a country like Guatemala, a country like Mongolia, a country like Thailand, a country like Belgium, it has some offensive military capability. But that's nothing compared to, say, the United States, Russia, France, Britain, Israel. These are countries that have a lot of military capability. But all states have some military capability. Okay? The third assumption, which is of enormous importance, has to do with intentions. Okay? Remember, the second assumption had to do with capabilities, and the third assumption has to do with intentions. And whenever you look at another state, what you always want to know is what are its capabilities and what are its intentions. So the third assumption has to do with intentions. And the assumption there is that you can never know for certain the intentions of another state. Now, why is that the case? It's because intentions are inside people's heads, and you can't see them, and you can't measure them. Capabilities are very different. Capabilities are material things. They're material entities that you can see, and you can count, and you can assess. Let me give you an example. When I was your age, the Cold War was going on. And I, being an American, spent a lot of time thinking about the Soviet Union. And we used to pay a lot of attention to Soviet capabilities and Soviet intentions. It was never difficult in an era of spy satellites to figure out what kind of capabilities the Soviets had. We could count how many armored division equivalents they had. We could count how many SS-18s they had. We know how many MIRVs they had on their SS-18s. We could count how many aircraft carriers, how many attack submarines. It was never difficult to figure out what Soviet capabilities were in any meaningful way. Soviet intentions, we had huge debates, which continue to this day, about whether the Soviet Union was a highly aggressive state, a status quo state, or what have you. Who knew what was in the head of Nikita Khrushchev? Who knew what was in the head of Brezhnev? Who had his ear? Who knew who the 3 or 4 people were at the table who decided what Soviet foreign policy really was? Well, we could never reach agreement. So there was always uncertainty about intentions. Now, there's some people say, John, you exaggerate. You can tell intentions of leaders today. You can listen to what they say, you can watch what they do, ... I have all sorts of counter arguments to knock that down. But let's assume they're correct. My response to that is to say that even if you believe that you can know the intentions of states today, there's no way you can know the intentions of another state in the future, because you don't even know who's going to be running China in the year 2020, who's going to be running Russia in the year 2025, who's going to be running the United States in 2030. In fact, if you think of it, one of you may be running this place 25 years from now. And who knows what your intentions will be. So you can never know future intentions. The best way to highlight this is to use an example that has nothing to do with international relations and has to do with the subject of marriage and divorce. Anytime two people get married, they inevitably think that the person that they're marrying is wonderful and that the two of them are going to live happily ever after. But as you know, in the Western world and in places like Russia, there's a very high level of divorce. That means a lot of people ended up marrying someone who they thought would have benign intentions towards them forever, but did not. It's very depressing to think about this. But if you get married, the truth is you can never be absolutely certain that the person you're marrying will not turn out to be Attila the Hun. It's really depressing, but you can never be certain. This gets at the essence of the problem of uncertainty about intentions. So I've given you three assumptions. One, the system is comprised of states and it's anarchic. Very simple. Second, all states have some offensive military capability, some more than others. Number three, you cannot be certain about the intentions of other states. I didn't say you could be certain that other states would have bad intentions. The starting assumption is you just can't be certain whether they'll be good or bad. Fourth and fifth assumptions are very simple. The fourth assumption is that the principal goal, not the only goal, the principal goal of states is survival. And the reason that survival is the principal goal is that if you don't survive, you can't pursue any of the other goals. Go read Hobbes's Leviathan, right? Hobbes tells you the one thing everybody agrees on in the state of nature is that survival is the number one goal, right? You got to survive because you can't pursue the other goals. Fifth assumption is states are basically rational actors. They're strategic calculators. States are pretty good at figuring out what is the best way to maximize their prospects of survival in the system. Okay, those are the five assumptions. You take them, you put them in the blender, you hit the on switch, and you mix them up. You get three forms of behavior. The first form of behavior that you get is fear. States in this system fear each other. And they fear each other for two reasons. Number one is you may end up next door, living near a state that has a lot of power and malign intentions. It's like to say you may end up living next door to Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan, right? One reason to be fearful. Level of fear varies from case to case, but a lot of fear in the system. Second reason that states fear each other is that if you get into trouble in international politics, there's no higher authority to call because it's an anarchic system. You know, in the United States, if you want to call the police in an emergency, you dial 911. 911. I like to say, if you dial 911 in international politics, you know who's at the other end? Nobody. There's nobody at the other end, right? And in a system like that, there's a certain level of fear ingrained in every state. That's the first form of behavior, fear. Second form of behavior is self-help. You understand when you operate in an anarchic world that the best way to survive is to take care of yourself. It's a self-help world. As my mother used to say when I was a little boy, God helps those who help themselves. God helps those who help themselves. Now, whether you believe in God or not, the fact of the matter is, in the international system, given that it's anarchic, given that there's nobody at the other end when you dial 911, you better take care of yourself first. The third form of behavior, remember, the first is fear. Second is self-help. The third form of behavior in this anarchic system, where you can never be certain that another state won't have a lot of power and won't put its gun sights on you, is to maximize the amount of power that you have. You want to be very powerful. As I often say to American audiences, how many of you go to bed at night worrying about Mexico or Canada or Guatemala or Costa Rica attacking the United States? It's unthinkable. You want to know why? Because we are Godzilla. We are incredibly powerful. Nobody would dare attack us in the Western Hemisphere. It's the best situation you can have. You want to be really powerful. In an anarchic system where you can never be certain about the intentions of other states, and some states may end up having a lot of power, right? You want to make sure you have more power than they do. Why? Because you're offensively oriented? No, because it's the best way to survive in an anarchic system. That's the argument. Now, the question becomes, what does it mean to be the most powerful state in the system? My argument is that it's impossible to be a global hegemon. The globe is just too big. The planet is just too big, and there's too much water. The best that you can do is to be a regional hegemon. You can dominate your region of the world, number one. But number two, you want to make sure that no other great power dominates its region of the world. Okay? Now, you may be asking yourself, why is it important that you not allow another country to dominate its region of the world? I'll give you a quick answer and then I'll explain. Because if another country dominates its region of the world, it's free to roam into your backyard. Now you're saying to yourself, what exactly is he talking about? I often say to American audiences, have you ever thought about why the United States is wandering all over the planet, sticking its nose in everybody's business, deploying military forces here, there, and everywhere? Have you ever thought about that? The reason is we are so secure in the Western Hemisphere. There are virtually no threats to the United States in the Western Hemisphere. There are no other great powers in the Western Hemisphere. That means we are free to roam around the planet because we don't have to worry about our backyard. To go to China, to get way ahead of myself, if China completely dominates Asia, it's free to roam. The United States wants a situation where China has to worry about its neighbors. Because if it has to worry about its neighbors, it has to concentrate on Asia. The United States did not want Imperial Germany or Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union to dominate Europe, because then it would be free to roam into the Western Hemisphere, into our backyard. We wanted the Soviets to have to worry about Western Europe, to worry about NATO. We wanted Germany to have to worry about the Soviet Union, before that Russia, to worry about France, to worry about England, because then it's not free to roam. So the story I've told you is, starting with those 5 assumptions, the ideal world for any great power is to be a regional hegemon, to dominate your area of the world, number one. And number two, make sure there is no other regional hegemon on the planet. In the Pentagon, they call this
a peer competitor. You don't want a peer competitor. Okay? That's the basic theory.